Henry Gomez never imagined that a pile of discarded electronics and his grandmother's old wheelchair would lead to the most extraordinary proposal of his life. The 34-year-old mechanic was 3 months behind on rent for his tiny garage in Riverside Heights, surviving on instant ramen and the occasional repair job that barely covered his mounting debts. But when fate rolled through his garage doors on that sweltering Tuesday afternoon in the form of a broken-down Tesla and its elegant passenger, everything changed forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like every other day in Henry's struggling existence. His alarm clock, a battered digital display he'd salvaged from a broken microwave, buzzed at 5:30 a.m. in his cramped studio apartment above Rosita's bakery. The scent of fresh bread drifted through the thin walls, a cruel reminder that he hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. Henry rolled out of bed, his back aching from sleeping on a mattress that had seen better decades, and stumbled to the makeshift kitchenette where a single electric burner and a mini-fridge constituted his entire culinary setup. Coffee came from a jar of instant crystals that he'd been rationing for 2 weeks. As the bitter liquid dissolved in lukewarm water, Henry stared at the stack of bills piled on his one small table like accusatory monuments to his failures. Rent notice. Final warning stamped in angry red letters. Electric company threatening disconnection. A medical bill from his grandmother's recent hospital stay that he couldn't even begin to comprehend, let alone pay. Abuela Carmen had been Henry's world since his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. She'd raised him in this same neighborhood, teaching him to fix things with his hands when they couldn't afford to buy new ones. "Mijo," she used to say, her weathered fingers guiding his young hands over broken radios and busted toasters. "Everything can be made better if you understand how it works, and you care enough to try." Now, at 83, Carmen sat in the local nursing home's generic wheelchair, her brilliant mind trapped in a body that no longer obeyed her commands. The stroke had taken her mobility, but not her spirit, and Henry visited every evening, watching her struggle with the basic wheelchair that the insurance covered, a clunky, uncomfortable contraption that bruised her dignity as much as her body. Henry's garage, Gomez Electronics and Repair, occupied a narrow space between a laundromat and a vacant storefront in the oldest part of Riverside Heights. The neighborhood had once thrived with small family businesses, but gentrification was creeping in like a slow-moving flood, pushing out long-time residents and replacing character with corporate sterility. Henry's lease was month to month now, and he knew his elderly landlord, Mr. Vasquez, was fielding calls from developers who saw dollar signs where Henry saw home. The garage itself was a testament to organized chaos. Shelves lined every wall, packed with salvaged electronics, vintage car parts, and experimental projects that Henry worked on during the long, customer-free hours. He'd always been gifted with electronics, could diagnose a circuit board failure by touch, coax life from components that other repair shops would have discarded. But genius didn't pay bills, and in a world of planned obsolescence and throwaway technology, there weren't many people interested in fixing things anymore. His most ambitious project occupied the garage's back corner, hidden under a paint-stained tarp. For 6 months, Henry had been working on something he'd never told anyone about, not even Carmen. Using salvaged smartphone components, discarded laptop parts, and sensors pulled from old gaming systems, he was building what he privately called a, quote, smart mobility system. The idea had come to him during one of Carmen's physical therapy sessions, watching her fight with a wheelchair that couldn't adapt to her needs, couldn't learn her preferences, couldn't help her navigate the world with the independence she deserved. The project consumed every spare dollar and countless midnight hours. Henry had taught himself programming through YouTube videos and library books, designing software that could learn a user's movement patterns, anticipate their needs, and provide assistance without taking away their autonomy. The hardware was cobbled together from 100 different sources: a gyroscope from a broken drone, pressure sensors from a damaged car seat, a small computer brain built from recycled smartphone processors. On this particular Tuesday, Henry was hunched over his workbench, soldering a delicate connection between the main control unit and a position sensor, when he heard the distinctive whine of an electric motor struggling outside his garage. The sound was followed by frustrated voices and the gentle hiss of what could only be an expensive car overheating. "Excuse me," a woman's voice called out, cultured and confident despite the obvious stress. "Do you work on electric vehicles?" Henry looked up from his soldering iron, squinting against the bright afternoon sun streaming through his open garage door. What he saw made him temporarily forget about the intricate circuitry in his hands. A sleek black Tesla Model S sat at an awkward angle in his driveway, steam rising from its hood, and beside it stood the most striking woman he'd ever seen. She appeared to be in her early 40s, with shoulder-length auburn hair that caught the sunlight and intelligent green eyes that seemed to assess everything around her with the quick precision of someone accustomed to making important decisions. She wore an elegant navy blue business suit that probably cost more than Henry made in 3 months, but there was something approachable about her smile, something genuine in the way she looked directly at him rather than through him. What struck Henry most, however, was the state-of-the-art electric wheelchair she sat in, a sleek, modern machine that hummed quietly and seemed to respond to her slightest movement. Even from across the garage, he could see the subtle LED indicators and what looked like a small display panel integrated into the armrest. This wasn't a basic medical device. This was cutting-edge technology wrapped in elegant design. "I'm Henry," he said, setting down his tools and wiping his hands on a shop rag that had seen better days. "And yes, I work on anything with circuits. What seems to be the problem?" The woman's smile widened, and Henry noticed the way it transformed her entire face, adding warmth to features that might otherwise have seemed intimidatingly perfect. "I'm Isabella Martinez," she said, extending a manicured hand that contrasted sharply with Henry's grease-stained fingers. "And I'm afraid my car has decided to have a breakdown at the worst possible moment. I have a board meeting in 2 hours, and my usual service center is across town." As Henry approached the Tesla, he could immediately diagnose the problem from the error messages flashing on the dashboard display. A coolant pump failure, serious enough to strand the vehicle but not catastrophic. The kind of repair that would take a qualified technician about an hour and cost Isabella probably $800 at the dealer. What Henry didn't know, as he popped the hood and began examining the sleek electric drivetrain, was that Isabella Martinez wasn't just any stranded motorist. She was the CEO of TechFlow Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing software companies on the West Coast, with a personal net worth that could have bought Henry's entire neighborhood. More importantly, she was a woman who had spent the last 3 years since her paragliding accident searching for innovations that could improve life for people with mobility challenges. And she was about to discover that the solution she'd been seeking was hiding under a paint-stained tarp in the most unlikely place imaginable. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Tesla's coolant pump had failed spectacularly, but Henry knew he could have Isabella back on the road within the hour. What he didn't expect was for her to roll her wheelchair deeper into his cluttered garage while he worked, her keen eyes taking in every detail of his chaotic workshop with the intensity of someone who understood technology at a fundamental level. "This is fascinating," Isabella said, maneuvering her sleek wheelchair between workbenches crowded with salvaged circuit boards and half-assembled electronics. "You've got components here from at least 6 different smartphone generations, and is that a quantum sensor array from a medical imaging device?" Henry looked up from the Tesla's engine compartment, surprised by her technical knowledge. Most of his customers barely understood the difference between software and hardware, but Isabella was identifying complex components with the ease of an engineer. "You know electronics?" "Software engineering, actually. MIT, class of '98. Isabella's wheelchair hummed quietly as she turned to examine a shelf lined with vintage computer processors. "Though I've always been fascinated by the hardware side. There's something beautiful about the marriage of physical and digital systems." As Henry worked on replacing the failed coolant pump, Isabella continued her exploration of his workshop. She moved with practiced efficiency, her advanced wheelchair responding to subtle weight shifts and what appeared to be eye-tracking controls. Henry found himself stealing glances at the sophisticated machine, noting the seamless integration of sensors and the intuitive interface design. "Your wheelchair," Henry said, tightening a connection in the Tesla's cooling system, "that's not standard medical equipment." Isabella's laugh was warm but carried a note of irony. "Definitely not. This little beauty cost more than most people's cars. Custom built by a team in Switzerland, with adaptive AI, predictive mobility assistance, and enough processing power to run a small data center." She patted the wheelchair's armrest affectionately. "It's also the best money can buy, and it's still not perfect." "What do you mean?" "Well, for all its sophistication, it still doesn't truly understand me. It can learn patterns, sure, but it can't anticipate needs. It can't read context. If I'm having a bad day, or if my muscle tension is different, or if I'm in an unfamiliar environment," Isabella shrugged. "It's reactive instead of intuitive, if that makes sense." Henry paused in his work, his mind immediately jumping to the project hidden under the tarp 15 feet away. What if it could learn more than patterns? What if it could understand intent? "That would be the holy grail of assistive technology," Isabella said, her voice taking on the passionate tone of someone discussing a subject close to her heart. "True adaptive intelligence that could partner with the user instead of just serving them, but the processing requirements alone would be astronomical, not to mention the sensor array needed to." She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes fixed on something behind Henry. Following her gaze, he realized she was staring at the covered project in the corner, where a single cable had worked its way out from under the tarp, revealing a glimpse of the custom sensor housing he'd spent weeks perfecting. "What's under there?" Isabella asked quietly. Henry felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. His project was a joke compared to Isabella's Swiss-engineered marvel, a Frankenstein creation of salvaged parts and amateur programming that would probably seem laughably primitive to someone who understood real technology. "Nothing important, just a hobby project." But Isabella was already rolling toward the covered workspace, and something in her expression told Henry that she wasn't going to be easily deterred. "May I?" "It's not finished," Henry said quickly. "It's not even close to finished. It's just something I've been tinkering with in my spare time, and it probably doesn't even work properly, and—" "Henry," Isabella's voice was gentle but firm. "May I see it?" With reluctant hands, Henry pulled away the paint-stained tarp, revealing his creation. The base was his grandmother's old wheelchair, a basic manual model he'd acquired from the nursing home when they'd upgraded Carmen to a standard electric chair. But everything else was pure Henry, a web of sensors mounted discreetly along the frame, a compact computer housing built into the back support, and an elegant control interface integrated into the armrest. The system looked rough around the edges, with visible wiring and components that clearly came from a dozen different sources. But there was something beautiful about it too, a harmony of function and form that spoke to countless hours of careful thought and meticulous craftsmanship. Isabella was silent for a long moment, her trained eye taking in every detail. Then she leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is using pressure mapping for posture prediction. The sensors can detect micro-movements," Henry said, his initial embarrassment giving way to the enthusiasm he felt whenever he talked about his work. "Weight shifts, muscle tension patterns, even breathing rhythms. The AI learns not just what you want to do, but how you feel while you're doing it. And this?" Isabella pointed to a small array of cameras mounted on the wheelchair's front frame. "Environmental awareness. It maps the space ahead in real time, identifies obstacles, measures accessibility features. But more than that, it learns about places you go frequently. Your favorite coffee shop, your office, your home. It remembers where the curb cuts are, which elevators are most reliable, even things like which restaurant tables have the best wheelchair access." Isabella's eyes widened as she began to understand the scope of Henry's creation. "It's building a personalized accessibility map." "Exactly. And it shares that data anonymously with other users, so the system gets smarter for everyone. If someone discovers that a particular building has better wheelchair access through the side entrance, that information gets integrated into the collective knowledge base." "Henry," Isabella said slowly, "this is revolutionary." But Henry was already shaking his head. "It's held together with salvaged parts and hope. The processing unit is jury-rigged from old smartphone CPUs. The sensors are repurposed from 6 different industries, and the software—" He laughed bitterly. "The software is written by a mechanic who learned programming from YouTube videos." "Show me," Isabella said simply. "What?" "Show me how it works." "Can I try it?" Henry's immediate instinct was to refuse. The system was untested, potentially dangerous, certainly unreliable. But something in Isabella's expression, a mixture of scientific curiosity and personal hope, made him reconsider. "It's not safe," he warned. "I've only tested it with basic movements, and the calibration process takes time, and—" "I'll sign a waiver," Isabella interrupted with a slight smile. In my business, you don't discover breakthrough technology by playing it safe. 20 minutes later, Isabella was seated in Henry's creation. Her expensive Swiss wheelchair moved aside like a discarded prototype. The system's calibration process was remarkably intuitive. Sensors learning her posture, her natural movement patterns, her preferred response sensitivity. Henry stood nearby with a tablet showing the AI's real-time analysis, watching as the system began to understand its new user. "Try moving forward," Henry suggested. Isabella leaned slightly forward, and the wheelchair responded instantly, but not just with movement. The system had already scanned the garage environment and was providing subtle feedback about optimal paths, potential obstacles, even surface conditions that might affect stability. "It's reading the floor composition," Isabella said with wonder. "It knows there's an oil stain 3 feet ahead, and it's suggesting an alternate route." "The chemical sensors can detect slippery surfaces," Henry explained, his excitement building as he watched his creation perform flawlessly. "But watch this. Try approaching that workbench." As Isabella moved toward the cluttered workspace, the wheelchair's cameras identified the bench height, measured the clearance space, and automatically adjusted her position for optimal accessibility. When she reached for a tool on the surface, the chair made a barely perceptible shift to bring her into perfect alignment. "It's not just responding to what I'm doing," Isabella breathed. "It's anticipating what I want to do." For the next 30 minutes, Isabella put Henry's system through its paces, testing its responses, exploring its capabilities, and asking increasingly technical questions about its design and programming. With each successful demonstration, her excitement grew more evident, and Henry found himself explaining features he'd never thought anyone would care about: the empathy algorithms that could detect user frustration, the learning protocols that adapted to daily energy fluctuations, the social integration features that could help users connect with others facing similar mobility challenges. Finally, Isabella transferred back to her own wheelchair, but her eyes remained fixed on Henry's creation, with the intensity of someone who had just witnessed something extraordinary. "Henry," she said quietly, "how would you like to change the world?" Before he could answer, her phone buzzed with an urgent reminder. The board meeting she'd been rushing to attend was starting in 45 minutes, and even with the Tesla repaired, she'd be cutting it close. "I have to go," Isabella said, pulling out her wallet to pay for the repair, "but I want to talk to you more about this. A lot more." As Henry watched Isabella's Tesla disappear down the street, he had no idea that she was already making phone calls to her engineering team, to her board of directors, to patent attorneys and manufacturing specialists. By the time she reached her office, Isabella had cleared her schedule for the next day and begun formulating a plan that would transform not just Henry's life, but the lives of millions of people who struggled with mobility challenges. What Henry also didn't know was that Isabella Martinez wasn't just impressed by his technology. She was impressed by the man who'd created it, the compassion that had driven him to build something beautiful from discarded parts, the genius that had emerged from necessity and love. And as Isabella sat in her boardroom that evening, presenting her team with photos and videos of Henry's creation, she was already imagining a future that went far beyond business partnerships and licensing agreements. She was imagining a future where brilliant, caring, extraordinary Henry Gomez might be not just her technological collaborator, but something much more personal and profound. Isabella arrived at Henry's garage the next morning in a convoy that looked like something out of a science fiction movie. 3 black SUVs pulled up outside the cramped workshop, followed by a sleek white van marked TechFlow Dynamics Mobile Engineering Lab. Henry, who had been attempting to repair a vintage radio while nursing his 3rd cup of instant coffee, nearly dropped his soldering iron when he saw the procession through his grimy front window. The first person to emerge was Isabella herself, looking impossibly elegant in a charcoal gray business suit despite the early hour. But she wasn't alone. A small army of people in matching TechFlow polo shirts began unloading equipment from the van: laptops, testing devices, cameras, and what appeared to be some kind of portable 3D scanner. Henry watched in bewilderment as they efficiently set up a temporary workstation in his parking area, complete with a canopy tent and multiple folding tables. "Good morning, Henry," Isabella called out cheerfully as she rolled through his open garage door. "I hope you don't mind the entourage. I brought some friends who are very eager to meet you." Behind her came a woman in her 30s with short-cropped black hair and intense brown eyes, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "Henry, this is Dr. Sophia Chen, my head of research and development. Sophia, meet the genius I was telling you about." Mr. Gomez, Dr. Chen said, extending her hand with the enthusiasm of someone meeting a celebrity. I've been studying the video footage Isabella shared last night, and I have to say, your approach to predictive mobility assistance is unlike anything I've seen in 15 years of assistive technology research. The sensor integration alone is groundbreaking. Henry felt overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Yesterday he'd been a struggling mechanic worried about making rent, and now he had a team of engineers setting up shop in his driveway like he was some kind of important inventor. I'm sorry, but I'm not sure I understand what's happening here. Isabella's smile was warm but businesslike. Henry, what's happening is that you've created something extraordinary, and I'd like to make you an offer. But first, I want my team to fully understand what you've built. Would you mind if we conduct some formal testing? For the next 3 hours, Henry found himself giving a comprehensive demonstration of his smart wheelchair system to an audience of fascinated engineers. Dr. Chen and her team documented every feature, measured response times, analyzed the AI's learning algorithms, and tested the environmental mapping capabilities with scientific rigor. They brought in professional mobility consultants, disability advocacy experts, and even a patent attorney who seemed to grow more excited with each passing minute. The predictive algorithms are processing 17 different input streams simultaneously, Dr. Chen announced to Isabella after completing her initial analysis. Pressure sensors, gyroscopes, camera feeds, even biometric data from skin conductivity. And the machine learning model is adapting in real time, not just to user preferences, but to emotional states and physical conditions. What does that mean in practical terms? Isabella asked, though Henry suspected she already knew the answer. It means this system doesn't just help people move through the world, it understands how they want to move through the world. It's the difference between a sophisticated tool and a true partner. As the testing continued, Henry learned more about Isabella's background and her motivations. TechFlow Dynamics had started as a software consulting company, but had evolved into a major player in accessibility technology after Isabella's paragliding accident 3 years earlier. She'd discovered firsthand how inadequate most assistive devices were, despite their premium prices and sophisticated marketing. The problem with most mobility aids, Isabella explained as they watched her team test the wheelchair's navigation system, is that they're designed by engineers who've never experienced mobility challenges themselves. They focus on technical capabilities instead of user experience, on features instead of feelings. But your chair is pretty impressive, Henry said, gesturing toward Isabella's Swiss-engineered wheelchair. It's a beautiful machine, Isabella agreed. It cost $140,000, and it can do things that seem almost magical, but it doesn't know when I'm having a difficult day. It doesn't understand that sometimes I want to take the longer route because I enjoy the scenery, or that I prefer certain textures under my wheels, or that I get anxious in crowded spaces and need a little extra personal space buffer. Henry nodded, thinking of his grandmother struggling with her basic wheelchair at the nursing home. Carmen, my grandmother, she always says her chair makes her feel like a passenger in her own life. Exactly, and that's what makes her creation so special, Henry. You didn't build a mobility device, you built a companion. As the afternoon wore on, Isabella's team completed their comprehensive evaluation and began packing up their equipment. The results, according to Dr. Chen, were unprecedented. Henry's system outperformed every existing mobility aid on the market, in areas ranging from user satisfaction to predictive accuracy to learning speed. Henry, Isabella said as her team loaded the last of their gear into the van, I'd like to make you a proposition. They sat in the relative quiet of Henry's garage, surrounded by the familiar clutter of his workshop. Isabella's expensive wheelchair and Henry's salvaged parts creation sat side by side, representing two completely different approaches to solving the same fundamental challenge. TechFlow Dynamics wants to partner with you to bring this technology to market, Isabella began. We have the manufacturing capabilities, the distribution networks, the regulatory expertise, and the capital to turn your invention into something that could help millions of people worldwide. Henry felt his heart race. What kind of partnership? Full partnership. You'd retain ownership of all core patents, we'd handle production and distribution, and you'd receive 50% of all profits. But more than that, I want you to lead the development team. This would be your project, your vision, implemented with our resources. The offer was staggering. Henry tried to process the implications. Financial security, the chance to help people like his grandmother, the opportunity to see his invention reach people who desperately needed it. But something in Isabella's expression suggested there was more to her proposition. "There's something else," Isabella said, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "Something personal I need to tell you." Henry waited, noting the way Isabella's hands had tightened slightly on her wheelchair's armrests, a tell he'd learned to recognize during their time together the previous day. "Henry, I've spent the last 3 years since my accident building walls around my personal life. I convinced myself that focusing on business, on helping other people with mobility challenges, was enough to fill the empty spaces. But meeting you, seeing what you've created not for profit or recognition but out of love for your grandmother," Isabella paused, searching for the right words. "I haven't felt genuinely excited about anything in years. Not just professionally excited, but personally excited. The way you think, the way you solve problems, the way you see possibilities where others see limitations. It's extraordinary. You're extraordinary." Henry felt the world tilt slightly around him. Was Isabella Martinez, brilliant CEO and tech industry legend, actually? "I know this is unconventional," Isabella continued, her voice growing stronger with determination. "I know we've only known each other for 2 days. But Henry, I believe in taking decisive action when you recognize something valuable. And I recognize something incredibly valuable in you." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box, setting it carefully on Henry's workbench between a broken circuit board and a jar of screws. "Henry Gomez, would you marry me?" The garage fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic and the soft whir of Isabella's wheelchair's cooling system. Henry stared at the ring box, his mind reeling with the impossibility of the moment. Yesterday he'd been a struggling mechanic facing eviction. Today he was being offered a business partnership that could change the world, and a marriage proposal from one of the most remarkable women he'd ever met. "Isabella," Henry said slowly, "are you serious?" "Completely serious. I know it's fast, I know it's unconventional, but Henry, I've spent 42 years learning to trust my instincts about people and opportunities. My instincts are telling me that you're not just a brilliant inventor, you're a man with the kind of heart and integrity that I want to build a life with." Isabella's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice remained steady. "I'm not proposing because I need saving, and I'm not trying to save you. I'm proposing because I think we could build something extraordinary together, both professionally and personally. But if you need time to think about it—" "No," Henry said quietly. Isabella's face fell slightly. "No, you won't consider it?" "No, I don't need time to think about it." Henry reached for the ring box with hands that trembled slightly. "Isabella Martinez, yes. Yes to the partnership. Yes to changing the world together. And yes to the most unexpected and wonderful proposal I never saw coming." As Henry opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant platinum band, he realized that his life had just transformed in ways he couldn't have imagined 48 hours earlier. But more than that, he understood that Isabella's proposal wasn't really about quick decisions or business opportunities. It was about 2 people who had recognized something rare and precious in each other, and were brave enough to reach for it. The news of their engagement spread through Riverside Heights like wildfire, but not in the way Henry had expected. Instead of congratulations, he found himself facing a mixture of skepticism, concern, and outright suspicion from the people who had known him his entire life. The morning after Isabella's proposal, Henry walked to Rosita's bakery for his usual coffee and found himself the center of uncomfortable attention. "Mijo," Rosita whispered conspiratorially as she handed him his café con leche. "Are you sure you know what you're doing? That woman, she's from a different world. Rich people, they don't marry mechanics unless they want something." The sentiment was echoed throughout the neighborhood. At the corner grocery store, Mrs. Valdez pulled him aside to express her concerns about gold diggers in expensive suits. Even Carlos, the mechanic who rented the bay next to Henry's garage, seemed worried about his friend's sudden change in fortune. "Henry, man, I'm happy for you, but this whole thing seems fast," Carlos said as they shared lunch from a taco truck parked outside their building. "Yesterday you couldn't afford lunch. Today you're engaged to a millionaire CEO. It's like something out of a telenovela." But the most difficult conversation came that evening when Henry visited his grandmother at the Sunset Gardens nursing home. Carmen Gomez sat in her standard-issue wheelchair by the window of her small room, her sharp eyes studying her grandson's face with the intensity of someone who had learned to read between the lines of what people told her. "Tell me about her," Carmen said simply after Henry had shared the basic facts of his whirlwind engagement. Abuela, she's incredible. She understands technology, she believes in what I've built, and she wants to help me make it available to people who need it. People like you. Carmen's weathered hands gripped the arms of her wheelchair. And you love her? The question hung in the air between them. Henry realized he'd been so overwhelmed by the business opportunity and the dramatic gesture of Isabella's proposal that he hadn't really examined his own feelings. Did he love Isabella? He was certainly attracted to her intelligence, impressed by her accomplishments, grateful for her belief in his work. But love? I think I could love her, Henry said honestly. I know it sounds crazy, but there's something about her that feels right. Like we understand each other in a way that goes beyond just the wheelchair project. Carmen nodded slowly. Your grandfather proposed to me after knowing me for 2 weeks. Everyone said we were crazy, that it would never last. We were married for 53 years before El Señor called him home. She reached for Henry's hand with fingers that trembled slightly but still possessed surprising strength. Mijo, the heart knows things the mind hasn't figured out yet. But be careful, make sure she sees you for who you are, not just for what you can create. Meanwhile, Isabella was facing her own challenges as news of their engagement reached her professional circles. The TechFlow Dynamics Board of Directors had called an emergency meeting, and Isabella found herself in the uncomfortable position of defending her personal decisions to people who saw everything through the lens of corporate liability and public relations. Isabella, we respect your right to pursue personal happiness, said Margaret Thornton, the board's chairman and Isabella's former mentor. But engaging to marry someone you've known for 2 days raises questions about your judgment, questions that could affect investor confidence. My personal life has never interfered with my professional responsibilities, Isabella replied coolly, but she could see the concern in the faces around the polished conference table. This isn't just about personal life, interjected David Kim, the company's chief financial officer. You're proposing a major partnership with this mechanics company, potentially worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The optics of combining a business deal with a romantic relationship are problematic. Dr. Sophia Chen, who had been quietly reviewing her technical assessment on her tablet, finally spoke up. If I may interrupt, I think we're losing sight of what's really important here. Henry Gomez has created something revolutionary. Whether Isabella marries him or not doesn't change the fact that his technology could transform our entire industry. But it does change how that technology gets developed and marketed, Margaret pointed out. If this marriage doesn't work out, we could find ourselves in legal battles that destroy the partnership and damage our reputation. Isabella felt a familiar surge of frustration. Throughout her career, she'd faced constant scrutiny of her personal choices, with colleagues and board members assuming that her emotional decisions must be flawed simply because she was a woman in a male-dominated industry. I've built this company through careful analysis and calculated risks, she said firmly. This partnership with Henry isn't emotional decision-making, it's strategic positioning for the future of assistive technology. And the marriage proposal? Margaret asked pointedly. The marriage proposal is based on my assessment that Henry Gomez is an extraordinary man whose values align with mine and whose company I genuinely enjoy. Yes, it's fast. Yes, it's unconventional. But it's also my decision to make. The meeting ended with a reluctant agreement to proceed with the business partnership while implementing additional oversight measures to protect both parties. Isabella left feeling exhausted by the need to justify her choices to people who claimed to support her but consistently questioned her judgment. That evening, Henry and Isabella met at a quiet restaurant in downtown Riverside Heights, a family-owned Italian place that Henry's grandmother had recommended. The contrast between their worlds was evident even in their choice of venue. Isabella arrived in a car service, while Henry walked the 6 blocks from his apartment. How did your board meeting go? Henry asked as they settled into a corner booth, Isabella transferring gracefully from her wheelchair to the restaurant chair. About as well as expected, Isabella replied with a rueful smile. They're concerned about the optics of mixing business with personal relationships. How about you? How's the neighborhood taking the news? Henry laughed, but there was tension in it. Let's just say that everyone thinks you're either crazy or have some secret agenda. Rosita thinks you're planning to steal my recipes, and Carlos is convinced you're going to break my heart and leave me broke. And what do you think? Isabella asked quietly. Henry studied her face in the warm light of the restaurant's candles. Despite the expensive clothes and polished appearance, there was something vulnerable in Isabella's expression, a hint of uncertainty that made her seem more human and accessible. "I think we're both taking a huge leap of faith," Henry said. "I think we barely know each other, and I think everyone around us has legitimate reasons to be concerned. But I also think that sometimes the best decisions feel risky precisely because they're worth making." They spent the next 2 hours talking, really talking, for the first time since Isabella's dramatic proposal. Henry learned about Isabella's childhood in a working-class family in Phoenix, her struggles as one of the few women in her MIT engineering program, and the loneliness that had followed her accident and recovery. Isabella discovered Henry's dreams beyond the wheelchair project, his interest in sustainable technology, his desire to create innovations that could help underserved communities, his quiet ambition to prove that genius could emerge from anywhere. "I need to ask you something," Isabella said as they shared a dessert that Henry insisted was almost as good as his grandmother's flan. "What happens if this doesn't work? The marriage, I mean. The business partnership is solid regardless, but what if we discover we're not compatible as a couple?" Henry considered the question seriously. "Then we figure out how to be partners and co-parents to this technology we're creating together, even if we're not husband and wife." "But Isabella, I don't think that's going to happen." "Why not?" "Because I've never met anyone who challenges me the way you do. You make me want to think bigger, dream bigger, become better than I thought I could be. And I hope that maybe I do the same for you." Isabella reached across the table to take Henry's hand, noting the permanent grease stains under his fingernails and the calluses that spoke of years of careful work. "You do," she said softly. "You absolutely do." As they left the restaurant together, Isabella in her high-tech wheelchair and Henry walking beside her, both felt the weight of the decision they'd made and the challenges that lay ahead. But they also felt something else, a growing conviction that their unconventional partnership might be exactly what both of them needed to become the people they were meant to be. The next morning would bring new challenges as they began the complex process of merging their lives, their work, and their very different worlds. But tonight, they were simply two people who had found something unexpected and precious in each other, and who were brave enough to fight for it despite the odds. Retry. B. Proceed with Part 5 without include title. Make sure that each part at least 801,000 words. Write 5th from 10 part of story. Please make sure you don't do any overlapping and rewriting. Edit. The TechFlow Dynamics headquarters occupied a gleaming 30-story tower in the heart of downtown San Cristobal, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun like a beacon of corporate success. Henry stood in the marble lobby, feeling distinctly out of place in his best button-down shirt and khakis, while executives in $1,000 suits swept past him toward banks of polished elevators. This was his first day as Chief Innovation Officer of TechFlow's new Assistive Technology Division, a title that still felt surreal when he said it out loud. Isabella met him at the elevator bank, looking every inch the successful CEO in a navy blue power suit and pearl earrings. But her smile was warm and genuine as she kissed his cheek, a gesture that drew curious glances from passing employees who were still adjusting to the news of their boss's engagement to the unknown mechanic. "Ready for the grand tour?" Isabella asked as they stepped into a private elevator marked Executive Access Only. The 28th floor had been completely renovated over the past week, transformed from standard office space into what Isabella called Innovation Central. Henry followed her through corridors, lined with whiteboards, covered in equations and diagrams, past laboratories equipped with 3D printers and testing equipment that cost more than his entire garage, and into a spacious workshop that had been designed specifically for his wheelchair project. "This is your domain," Isabella said, gesturing toward workbenches stocked with every tool and component Henry could have imagined. "Dr. Chen worked with our facilities team to create something that would feel familiar, but give you access to resources you've never had before." Henry ran his hands over a precision soldering station that probably cost more than his annual rent, then moved to examine a computer workstation with processing power that made his salvaged smartphone components look like stone tools. It was a dream workshop, the kind of space he'd fantasized about during long nights in his cluttered garage. But as impressive as the facilities were, it was the team Isabella had assembled that truly took Henry's breath away. Dr. Chen introduced him to 12 engineers, designers, and researchers who had been recruited from companies across Silicon Valley specifically to work on the wheelchair project. Each brought expertise in areas Henry had been struggling with alone: battery technology, sensor miniaturization, AI optimization, and manufacturing processes. "Henry, meet Dr. James Washington," Dr. Chen said, introducing a tall man with graying temples and kind eyes. "He's our biomechanics specialist, formerly with Stanford Medical. James, this is the genius who figured out how to read user intent through micropressure variations." Dr. Washington's handshake was firm, his expression one of genuine respect, rather than the polite skepticism Henry had expected. "Mr. Gomez, I've been studying your sensor array design. The integration of multiple input streams to create predictive behavior modeling is extraordinary. I have some ideas about how we might enhance the biometric feedback systems, if you're interested." The morning continued with introductions to specialists in materials science, user interface design, regulatory compliance, and market research. Each team member had clearly studied Henry's work in detail and came prepared with thoughtful questions and suggestions that built upon his original concepts rather than attempting to replace them. "The goal," Isabella explained as they gathered in a conference room overlooking the city, "is to enhance Henry's vision without losing the heart of what makes it special. We have the resources to solve the technical challenges he's been facing, but only if we remember that the magic isn't in the sophistication of the components, it's in the empathy built into the system." Dr. Chen pulled up holographic displays showing the wheelchair's current design alongside proposed enhancements. "We can miniaturize the sensor array by 60% while improving accuracy. We can extend battery life to over a week of normal use. We can integrate voice control, gesture recognition, and even predictive health monitoring." "But Henry, this is your project. Nothing gets implemented without your approval." As the technical discussions continued, Henry found himself both energized and overwhelmed. The team's suggestions were brilliant, their enthusiasm was infectious, and their resources were beyond anything he'd dreamed possible. But there was also something intimidating about the scale of what they were proposing. His simple invention, born from love for his grandmother and built in a cluttered garage, was being transformed into something that could affect millions of lives worldwide. During lunch break, Henry called his grandmother from a quiet corner of the building's executive dining room. Carmen's voice was warm but concerned when she answered the phone at the nursing home. "Micho, how was your first day as a big executive?" "Overwhelming," Henry admitted. "Abuela, they want to turn my wheelchair into something incredible. The things they're talking about, it could help so many people. But sometimes I wonder if I'm in over my head." Carmen was quiet for a moment, and Henry could picture her sitting by the window in her room, considering her words carefully. "Henry, do you remember when you were 8 years old and you fixed Mrs. Rodriguez's television?" "Vaguely. She had taken it to 3 different repair shops, and they all told her it was too old, too broken, not worth fixing. But you looked at it for 5 minutes and found a loose wire that was causing all the problems." "Sometimes, Mijo, the experts are so busy looking for complicated solutions that they miss the simple ones. What if I mess this up? What if I can't handle working with all these brilliant people?" "Then you learn from them, and they learn from you. But Henry, remember why you built that wheelchair in the first place? It wasn't for fame or money or to impress anyone. It was because you saw me struggling and you wanted to help. Don't let all the fancy equipment and big words make you forget that." The afternoon brought Henry's first real challenge when the team began discussing manufacturing timelines and market strategy. Isabella's business development director, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Vance, presented projections that showed the wheelchair could generate over $1 billion in revenue within 5 years if properly marketed. "The key," Patricia explained, "is positioning this as a premium lifestyle product rather than medical equipment. We target affluent early adopters, build brand prestige, then gradually expand to broader markets as production costs decrease." Henry felt his stomach clench. What about people who can't afford premium prices? What about people like my grandmother who rely on basic insurance coverage? "That's phase 2 of the rollout," Patricia replied smoothly. "Once we establish market presence and recoup development costs, we can explore more affordable versions for underserved populations." "Phase 2? Henry's voice carried a sharp edge that made everyone in the room turn to look at him. "So people who need this technology most have to wait until you've made enough profit from rich customers?" The conference room fell silent. Patricia looked to Isabella for support, but Isabella was studying Henry's expression with interest rather than concern. "What are you suggesting?" Dr. Chen asked carefully. I'm suggesting that we develop two versions simultaneously. The premium model for people who can afford it, and a basic model that works with existing insurance systems. The profits from the premium sales subsidize the affordable version. That would significantly impact our profit margins, Patricia pointed out. Good, Henry said firmly. This technology isn't supposed to be about maximizing profits. It's supposed to be about helping people. Isabella leaned forward in her chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Henry's right. Patricia, I want you to revise the business plan to include a dual-track development strategy. Premium and accessible versions launched simultaneously. Isabella, that's not standard industry practice. I don't care about industry practice. I care about making sure this technology serves the people who need it most, not just the people who can pay the most for it. The meeting ended with a revised timeline that incorporated Henry's accessibility requirements, but Henry could sense the tension his demands had created among some team members. As employees filed out of the conference room, Dr. Chen lingered behind. Henry, can I give you some advice? She said quietly. The people in this room are brilliant, but they're used to thinking about technology as a product first and a solution second. Your perspective is exactly what this project needs, but you're going to face resistance. Don't let them wear you down. That evening, Henry and Isabella sat in his small apartment above Rosita's bakery, sharing takeout Chinese food and reflecting on the day's events. The contrast between the gleaming corporate headquarters and Henry's modest living space seemed to symbolize the gap they were trying to bridge between their different worlds. I'm proud of you, Isabella said, using chopsticks to extract vegetables from her lo mein. What you did in that meeting today, standing up for your principles even when it wasn't the financially optimal choice, that's exactly why I fell for you. I'm not sure everyone on your team feels the same way, Henry replied. I could see Patricia calculating how much money I just cost the company. Patricia is brilliant at what she does, but she sometimes forgets that our mission isn't just to generate shareholder value. You reminded everyone today why we're really doing this. Henry set down his chopsticks and looked directly at Isabella. Are you sure about this? The marriage, the business partnership, all of it. Because once we're officially married, my decisions become your decisions, and vice versa. If I want to give away our technology to people who can't afford it, that affects your company's bottom line. Isabella reached across the small table to take his hand. Henry, 3 months ago, I was the CEO of a successful company that made good products and generated solid profits. I was also miserable, lonely, and convinced that I'd never find anyone who understood what really mattered to me. She gestured around his modest apartment, taking in the second-hand furniture and the photos of his family that covered one wall. This feels more like home than my mansion ever did. You feel more like family than most of my blood relatives. So yes, I'm sure. About all of it. As they cleaned up dinner and prepared for bed, Henry reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. 6 months ago, he'd been a struggling mechanic worried about paying rent. Now he was engaged to a CEO, leading a team of brilliant engineers and developing technology that could change the world. But more than the professional success or financial security, what struck him most was the sense of partnership he felt with Isabella. They disagreed on tactics sometimes, came from completely different backgrounds, and were still learning each other's rhythms and preferences. But their core values aligned in ways that made him optimistic about their future together, both personally and professionally. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they continued developing the wheelchair technology and planning their wedding. But tonight, Henry felt genuinely hopeful for the first time in years, hopeful about his work, his relationship, and his ability to make a meaningful difference in the world. The email arrived on a Thursday morning that had started like any other, hidden among routine messages and project updates in Henry's TechFlow inbox. The subject line was innocuous enough. Regulatory compliance inquiry, urgent response required. But when Henry opened it, his coffee mug slipped from his nerveless fingers, shattering against his office floor and sending ceramic shards skittering across the polished concrete. Immediate cease and desist order, patent infringement violation #2024 to 7829. The message was from Meridian Mobility Solutions, a company Henry had never heard of, claiming that his wheelchair technology violated 17 different patents they held on adaptive mobility assistance systems and predictive user interface technologies. According to the legal document attached to the email, Henry had 36 hours to halt all development, surrender all prototypes, and prepare for a lawsuit that could result in damages exceeding $50 million. Henry's hands shook as he scrolled through pages of dense legal language, patent numbers, and technical specifications that seemed to cover every aspect of his invention. Pressure-sensitive positioning systems, environmental mapping algorithms, predictive movement assistance, biometric feedback integration. Someone, somewhere, claimed to have invented all of it first. "Dr. Chen," Henry called out, his voice carrying across the Innovation Central workspace. "I need you to see this. Now." Sophia Chen appeared at his office door within seconds, took one look at Henry's expression, and immediately closed the door behind her. "What's wrong?" Henry wordlessly turned his computer screen toward her, watching her face change as she read the cease and desist order. Dr. Chen was rarely at a loss for words, but she sat in stunned silence for nearly a minute before speaking. "This is impossible," she said finally. "I personally conducted patent searches before we began development. These technologies you've created, there's nothing like them in the existing patent database." "Apparently there is now," Henry said bitterly. "Meridian Mobility Solutions claims they've held these patents for over 2 years. Look at this." He pointed to a section of the document that made his stomach churn. "They're claiming that my sensor array design is identical to their proprietary technology, filed in 2022. Dr. Chen leaned closer to the screen, her engineer's mind processing the implications. "Henry, your grandmother's wheelchair, the one you started with, when did you begin working on the modifications?" "About 18 months ago. Why?" "Because if these patents were filed in 2022 and you began development in early 2023, then either you somehow had access to their proprietary designs or—" She trailed off, the unspoken possibility hanging in the air between them. "Or I independently invented the same technology they claim to own," Henry finished, which they'll never believe. The next few hours passed in a blur of emergency meetings, urgent phone calls, and frantic research. Isabella arrived within 30 minutes of Henry's call, accompanied by TechFlow's head legal counsel, Margaret Reeves, a formidable woman in her 50s, who had built her reputation defending technology companies against patent trolls and frivolous lawsuits. "This is sophisticated," Margaret announced after reviewing the Meridian documents. "Too sophisticated to be a standard patent troll operation. These claims are specific, detailed, and backed by what appears to be legitimate prior art." "Appears to be?" Isabella asked sharply. "I'm running comprehensive searches through every patent database I can access, but preliminary results are concerning. Meridian Mobility Solutions does appear to hold patents that cover significant aspects of Henry's technology." Henry felt the walls closing in around him. "So what does this mean? Do we shut down the project?" "Not yet," Margaret said firmly. "Patent disputes are complex, and initial claims often don't hold up under scrutiny. But Henry, I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you ever had any contact with Meridian Mobility Solutions? Any former employees, any shared research, any possibility that you might have been exposed to their technology?" "I've never even heard of them before today," Henry said. "Everything I built came from my own research, my own trial and error, my own late nights in that garage trying to help my grandmother." Isabella reached for Henry's hand, her touch grounding him in the midst of his spiraling panic. "Margaret, what's our next step?" "I'm bringing in our patent litigation team and hiring outside counsel who specializes in mobility device patents. We'll need to document Henry's entire development process, every sketch, every prototype, every failed experiment. If he truly developed this technology independently, we can prove it." The investigation that followed was exhaustive and invasive. Patent attorneys combed through Henry's garage, photographing every component and documenting the timeline of his invention process. They interviewed his grandmother, his neighbors, even Rosita from the bakery, anyone who might have witnessed his work in progress. They analyzed the technical specifications of his early prototypes, comparing them to the Meridian patents line by line. Meanwhile, Dr. Chen led a parallel investigation into Meridian Mobility Solutions itself. What they discovered was deeply troubling. The company had been founded just 3 years earlier by a group of investors with no apparent background in assistive technology. Their patent portfolio had been assembled rapidly through acquisitions from struggling startups and individual inventors who had been forced to sell their intellectual property for financial reasons. It's a classic patent aggregation strategy, Dr. Chen explained during an emergency team meeting. They buy up patents from desperate inventors, then use them to attack anyone developing similar technology. The goal isn't to create products, it's to extract licensing fees and legal settlements. But the patents they're claiming predate Henry's work, Isabella pointed out. That's where it gets interesting, Dr. Chen said, pulling up a complex timeline on the conference room's display screen. I've been digging into the original patent filings, and several of them were submitted by inventors who were working on projects remarkably similar to Henry's. But here's the strange part. 3 of those inventors sold their patents to Meridian under distress conditions within the past 6 months. Henry felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of distress conditions? Financial pressure, legal threats. One inventor in particular, Dr. Sarah Kim from Portland, sold her adaptive mobility patents to Meridian last month after facing bankruptcy. Her technology was almost identical to your environmental mapping system. Isabella leaned forward in her chair. Are you suggesting that Meridian has been systematically targeting inventors working on similar technology? I'm suggesting that it's an interesting coincidence, Dr. Chen replied carefully, and I think we should talk to Dr. Kim. The phone call to Dr. Sarah Kim revealed a story that made Henry's blood run cold. 3 months earlier, Dr. Kim had been contacted by Meridian's legal team with claims that her mobility assistance research violated their existing patents. Facing expensive litigation and lacking the resources to fight, she had agreed to sell her patents to settle the dispute. They told me I had stolen their technology, Dr. Kim explained over the video conference, her voice bitter with remembered frustration. They had documentation that seemed to prove their patents predated my work. I couldn't afford the legal fees to challenge them. So I took their settlement offer and signed away everything I had spent 5 years developing. Dr. Kim, Henry said carefully, when did you first begin working on your mobility assistance technology? 2020. Right after my brother was injured in a motorcycle accident and I saw how inadequate his wheelchair was. Why? Henry and Isabella exchanged glances. Dr. Kim's timeline predated Meridian's alleged patent filings by 2 years, which meant either she was lying or Meridian's patents weren't as legitimate as they appeared. We need to talk to the other inventors, Isabella said after they ended the call. If Meridian has been systematically acquiring patents through intimidation, there might be a pattern we can expose. Over the next week, Henry's legal team contacted every inventor who had sold patents to Meridian. The stories were remarkably similar. Innovative researchers developing breakthrough assistive technologies, suddenly faced with patent infringement claims, forced to choose between expensive litigation or settlement agreements that stripped them of their life's work. But the most shocking discovery came when Margaret's team finally gained access to the original patent application files. Buried in technical documentation and legal language, they found evidence that suggested Meridian's patents weren't original inventions at all. They were compiled from the work of multiple inventors who had been systematically targeted and forced to surrender their intellectual property. It's intellectual property theft on a massive scale, Margaret announced during what would prove to be a pivotal team meeting. Meridian identifies promising inventors, uses legal intimidation to force them into settlements, then aggregates their patents into comprehensive portfolios that they use to attack the next generation of innovators. Henry felt a rage building in his chest that surprised him with its intensity. They're stealing from people like me. People who are trying to help their families, their communities. They're taking away innovations that could change lives, just to make money. The question is, Isabella said quietly, what do we do about it? Margaret's expression was grim but determined. We fight. Not just for Henry's technology, but for every inventor they victimized. This isn't just a patent dispute anymore. It's a case about whether innovation belongs to the people who create it or the corporations with enough money to steal it. As the meeting broke up and team members dispersed to continue their investigation, Henry sat alone in his office, staring at the computer screen that still displayed Meridian's cease and desist order. 2 weeks ago, he had been planning his wedding and preparing to launch technology that could help millions of people with mobility challenges. Now he was facing a legal battle that could destroy everything he'd built and bankrupt the woman he loved. But as he thought about Dr. Kim and the other inventors who had been forced to surrender their dreams to corporate bullies, Henry felt his resolve hardening. This wasn't just about his wheelchair anymore. It was about protecting the right of individual inventors to create, to innovate, to build solutions for problems that touch their hearts. He picked up his phone and called Isabella. "I want to countersue them," he said without preamble. "I want to expose what they've been doing and get those other inventors their patents back." "Henry, that could be incredibly expensive and time-consuming. Are you sure?" Henry looked around his gleaming office, then out the window toward the neighborhood where he'd grown up, where his grandmother still sat in her inadequate wheelchair at the nursing home. "I'm sure. Some fights are worth having, even when you're not sure you can win." The federal courthouse in downtown San Cristobal loomed like a concrete monument to justice delayed, its imposing facade casting long shadows across the plaza, where Henry sat on a cold metal bench, watching pigeons fight over scattered breadcrumbs. 3 weeks had passed since TechFlow's legal team filed their countersuit against Meridian Mobility Solutions, and the preliminary hearings were scheduled to begin in less than an hour. Henry's hands trembled slightly as he checked his phone for the dozenth time, hoping for encouraging news that never seemed to come. The past month had been a nightmare of depositions, document reviews, and emergency strategy sessions that stretched deep into the night. Meridian's legal team had responded to TechFlow's countersuit with a viciousness that surprised even Margaret Reeves, filing additional patent infringement claims and demanding an immediate injunction that would shut down Henry's entire research operation. They had also launched what Margaret grimly described as a scorched earth campaign, filing complaints with the Patent and Trademark Office claiming that Henry's original applications contained fraudulent information. Mr. Gomez, a young woman in a rumpled business suit, approached his bench clutching a thick folder of legal documents. "I'm Jennifer Walsh, paralegal with Reeves & Associates. Ms. Reeves asked me to find you. We need to review your testimony one more time before we go inside." Henry followed Jennifer into the courthouse, through security scanners and metal detectors that made him feel like a criminal rather than an inventor trying to protect his life's work. The hallways buzzed with activity, lawyers wheeling cases of documents, court reporters setting up equipment, and clusters of people in expensive suits who radiated the kind of confidence that comes from having unlimited legal budgets. In a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom, Henry found his legal team huddled around a table covered with laptops, patent documents, and what appeared to be several days' worth of coffee cups and takeout containers. Margaret Reeves looked up as he entered, her usually immaculate appearance showing signs of strain and exhaustion. "Henry, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "Meridian's attorneys have filed a motion for summary judgment. They're claiming that your technology is so obviously derivative of their patents that no reasonable jury could find in your favor." "What does that mean?" Henry asked, though the sinking feeling in his stomach suggested he already knew. "It means they want the judge to rule in their favor without a trial. If the motion is granted, we lose everything: the technology, the patents, potentially even your right to work in the assistive mobility field ever again." Dr. Chen looked up from her laptop, where she had been frantically reviewing technical specifications. "Henry, there's something else. Meridian has hired Dr. Richard Thornton as their expert witness. He's one of the most respected voices in mobility device engineering, and according to his preliminary report, your technology is substantially identical to patents held by Meridian." Henry felt the world tilt around him. Dr. Thornton's reputation in the field was unassailable. If he testified that Henry's work was derivative, few people would question his expert opinion. "How is that possible?" "I've never seen Meridian's technology. I built everything from scratch." "We know that," Margaret said gently, "but proving it in court is a different matter entirely. Meridian has documentation showing that their patent applications predate your work by months. They have expert witnesses prepared to testify about the impossibility of independent invention of such complex systems. And now they have Dr. Thornton." The conference room fell silent, except for the hum of laptops and the distant sounds of courthouse activity. Henry stared at the documents spread across the table, feeling the weight of impending defeat settling over him like a suffocating blanket. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was about to be stripped away by lawyers who had never held a soldering iron or spent sleepless nights trying to solve problems that touched their hearts. "There's one more thing," Margaret continued, her voice carefully neutral. "Isabella received a call this morning from Meridian's CEO, Marcus Blackwood. He's offering a settlement." Henry's head snapped up. "What kind of settlement?" "Complete withdrawal of all patent claims against you and TechFlow, plus plus a licensing agreement that would allow you to continue developing your technology. In exchange, TechFlow would pay Meridian $50 million and acknowledge their patent priority in all future publications. The number hit Henry like a physical blow, $50 million, enough to bankrupt TechFlow's assistive technology division and potentially damage the entire company. What did Isabella say? She said she needed to discuss it with you before making any decisions. But Henry, you should know that several board members are pushing hard for settlement. A protracted legal battle could cost even more than $50 million, with no guarantee of victory. Before Henry could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message from Isabella. Emergency board meeting called for this afternoon. They're pressuring me to take the settlement. I need you there. We're fighting this together. The courthouse hearing was a disaster from the opening arguments. Meridian's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Robert Ashford, who commanded the courtroom like a seasoned general, presented their case with surgical precision. He displayed side-by-side comparisons of Henry's technology and Meridian's patents, highlighting similarities that seemed damning even to Henry himself. Dr. Thornton's expert testimony was devastating, delivered with the authority of someone whose word carried enormous weight in the scientific community. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Thornton said, addressing the judge with calm confidence, the defendant's technology is not merely similar to Meridian's patented innovations, it is functionally identical in 17 distinct areas. The probability of independent invention of such complex integrated systems is mathematically negligible. Margaret did her best to counter Meridian's arguments, presenting evidence of Henry's development timeline and the witnesses who had observed his work and progress. But Henry could see in the judge's expression that they were losing ground with every passing minute. The legal system, designed to protect intellectual property rights, was being weaponized against the very type of individual innovation it was supposed to encourage. During the lunch recess, Henry sat in a downtown diner with Dr. Chen and Margaret, picking at a sandwich he couldn't taste while reviewing the afternoon's strategy. The mood at their table was grim, matching the gray skies visible through the restaurant's windows. "I've been thinking about Dr. Kim and the other inventors," Dr. Chen said quietly. "What if we're approaching this wrong? Instead of trying to prove that Henry invented his technology independently, what if we focus on proving that Meridian's patents shouldn't exist in the first place?" Margaret looked up from her legal brief. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if Meridian's patents are based on stolen technology? What if they've been systematically targeting inventors, forcing them to surrender their work, then filing comprehensive patents that compile everyone else's innovations?" "That would be fraud on a massive scale," Margaret said, "but proving it would require access to Meridian's internal documents, communications with their targeted inventors, potentially years of investigation." "We don't have years," Henry said bitterly. "We have about 6 hours before the judge rules on their summary judgment motion." Dr. Chen pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her contacts. "Henry, do you remember Dr. Kim mentioning that she had kept copies of her original research notes? What if she wasn't the only one? What if some of the other inventors Meridian targeted had documented their development processes?" A spark of hope flickered in Henry's chest. "You think we could prove that Meridian's patents are based on other people's work?" "I think it's worth a phone call," Dr. Chen said, already dialing Dr. Kim's number. The conversation that followed was revelatory. Dr. Kim had indeed kept detailed records of her development process, including dated lab notebooks and video documentation of her prototype testing. More importantly, she had been in contact with 3 other inventors who had been similarly targeted by Meridian, and all of them had maintained documentation of their original work. "Dr. Kim," Dr. Chen said, putting the call on speaker so the entire table could hear, "would you be willing to testify about your experiences with Meridian? With the other inventors?" There was a long pause before Dr. Kim responded. "Dr. Chen, Meridian made us sign non-disclosure agreements as part of our settlement. If we violate those agreements, they can sue us for everything we received plus penalties. But if their patents are fraudulent, those agreements might not be enforceable," Margaret interjected. "Dr. Kim, contracts based on illegal activities are void under federal law." Another pause. "How quickly would you need us there?" Henry felt his heart racing as Margaret explained the urgency of their situation. Within 2 hours, Dr. Kim and 2 other inventors were on flights to San Cristobal, bringing with them documentation that could potentially expose Meridian's entire operation. But as Henry returned to the courthouse for the afternoon session, he knew that even if they could prove Meridian's fraud, the legal system moves slowly, and judges were reluctant to make dramatic rulings based on last-minute evidence. The summary judgment motion would likely be decided based on the morning's testimony, and that testimony had not gone well for TechFlow. The afternoon brought more devastating expert testimony from Meridian's witnesses, each one building a case that Henry's technology was derivative rather than innovative. Henry watched his dreams crumble with each authoritative statement, each confident assertion that his life's work was nothing more than sophisticated theft. As the hearing concluded and the judge announced that he would rule on the summary judgment motion within 24 hours, Henry felt a despair deeper than anything he had experienced since his parents' death. Tomorrow he might lose not just his technology and his company, but his reputation and his ability to continue the work that had given his life meaning. The emergency TechFlow board meeting was scheduled for 6 o'clock, and Henry knew that Isabella would be facing enormous pressure to settle with Meridian rather than risk everything in a legal battle they were clearly losing. As he walked through the courthouse corridors toward what might be the end of his dreams, Henry wondered if love and partnership would be enough to survive the destruction of everything they had tried to build together. The TechFlow boardroom felt like a tribunal as Henry entered, finding Isabella seated at the head of the polished conference table, flanked by board members whose expressions ranged from sympathetic to openly hostile. The emergency session had been called for 6 o'clock, but Henry could see from the scattered coffee cups and crumpled papers that discussions had been ongoing for hours. Margaret Reeves sat in a corner with her laptop open, frantically coordinating with the team of investigators who were racing against time to gather evidence about Meridian's fraudulent practices. "Henry, thank you for joining us," said Patricia Vance, her tone carrying the false warmth of someone delivering bad news. "We've been reviewing the financial implications of continued litigation against Meridian Mobility Solutions." David Kim, the chief financial officer, pulled up a projection showing rows of numbers that made Henry's stomach clench. The preliminary estimates for a full patent trial are staggering. Legal fees alone could exceed $20 million, and that doesn't include potential damages if we lose. The settlement offer of $50 million looks reasonable by comparison. Reasonable? Henry couldn't keep the incredulity out of his voice. "They're demanding we pay them $50 million for technology I invented in my grandmother's garage. How is that reasonable?" Board member Margaret Thornton, no relation to the expert witness, leaned forward with the practiced patience of someone explaining obvious facts to a child. "Henry, I understand your emotional attachment to this project, but we have to consider the broader impact on TechFlow. A prolonged legal battle could damage our reputation, drain our resources, and ultimately destroy the company Isabella has spent years building." Isabella had remained silent throughout the discussion, her face carefully neutral as board members made their cases for settlement. But Henry could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the arms of her wheelchair with white-knuckled intensity. She was fighting a war on two fronts, against Meridian's legal assault and against her own board's pressure to surrender. "Isabella," said Dr. Robert Hayes, the longest-serving board member and Isabella's former mentor, "you hired me 20 years ago because you trusted my judgment. I'm telling you now that this fight isn't worth the risk. Cut your losses, pay the settlement, and move on to the next innovation." "Move on?" Henry stood up, his chair scraping against the polished floor. "Dr. Hayes, with respect, you're talking about abandoning technology that could help millions of people with mobility challenges. You're talking about letting corporate bullies steal innovations from individual inventors and sell them back at premium prices." "I'm talking about protecting this company from bankruptcy," Dr. Hayes replied sharply. "Your idealism is admirable, Henry, but business decisions can't be made based on emotions." Before Henry could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message from Dr. Chen. "Dr. Kim just landed. Emergency evidence review in conference room B now." "I need 5 minutes," Henry announced to the board. "There's new evidence that could change everything." Patricia scoffed. "Henry, we've been over this. The deadline for evidence submission has passed. Whatever you think you found will prove that Meridian has been systematically defrauding inventors and filing false patents," Henry interrupted. "Isabella, please. Give me 5 minutes to show you what we've discovered." Isabella looked around the table at her board members, reading the mixture of skepticism and impatience in their faces. 5 minutes, she said quietly. "But Henry, if this doesn't fundamentally change our legal position, we're voting on the settlement tonight." Conference room B had been transformed into a makeshift war room, with laptops, patent documents, and technical diagrams covering every available surface. Dr. Sarah Kim stood at the head of the table, looking exhausted but determined, flanked by two other inventors whose faces Henry recognized from the video calls they'd conducted over the past week. "Henry," Dr. Chen said urgently, "show them what we found." Dr. Kim opened her laptop and pulled up a series of documents that made Henry's breath catch. "These are my original research notes from 2020, she explained. "Detailed technical specifications for adaptive mobility assistance systems including pressure-sensitive positioning and environmental mapping algorithms." She clicked to the next slide, showing a patent document filed by Meridian in 2022. "This is the patent Meridian claims predates your work, Henry. Look at the technical specifications." Henry leaned closer to the screen, his engineer's eye immediately recognizing what Dr. Kim was showing him. The language was different, the formatting had been changed, but the underlying technical concepts were identical to Dr. Kim's original research that predated Meridian's patent by 2 years. "They didn't just force me to sell my patents," Dr. Kim continued, her voice growing stronger with righteous anger. "They used my research as the foundation for filing their own original patents. They took my work, my innovations, my solutions to problems that affected my own family, and they claimed ownership of them." Dr. Michael Torres, another inventor who had been targeted by Meridian, stepped forward with his own documentation. "Same thing happened to me. I developed biometric feedback systems for wheelchair users in 2019, filed provisional patents, started building prototypes. Meridian approached me last year claiming patent infringement, forced me to sell, then filed comprehensive patents based on my research." The third inventor, Dr. Lisa Chang, had a similar story. Environmental awareness systems, predictive user interface technologies, adaptive learning algorithms, all developed independently by individual inventors between 2019 and 2021, all acquired by Meridian through legal intimidation, all repackaged as original Meridian innovations. Margaret Reeves looked up from her laptop, where she had been frantically cross-referencing patent databases. "This is fraud on a massive scale. Meridian has been systematically identifying promising inventors, using spurious legal claims to force them into settlements, then filing patents based on the acquired technology." "But can we prove it in court?" Isabella asked, having wheeled into the conference room followed by several board members who couldn't resist seeing what the commotion was about. "We can prove it," Dr. Chen said confidently. "We have dated research notes, prototype documentation, witness testimony, and technical analysis showing that Meridian's patents are compiled from stolen innovations. But more than that," she pulled up another document on her laptop, "we have evidence of criminal conspiracy." The room fell silent as Dr. Chen explained what her investigation had uncovered. Meridian Mobility Solutions wasn't just a patent troll. It was part of a larger network of shell companies designed to acquire and monetize intellectual property through systematic fraud. The same investors behind Meridian had created similar companies, targeting innovations in renewable energy, medical devices, and software development. "They've stolen hundreds of patents from individual inventors," Dr. Chen continued. "Conservative estimates suggest they've extracted over $2 billion in licensing fees and settlements from technology they never developed." Dr. Kim stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of personal experience and professional authority. "Isabella, Henry, I can't give you back the 2 years I lost fighting these people, or the research opportunities I missed while rebuilding my career. But I can help you stop them from doing this to anyone else." Isabella looked around the room at the evidence spread across every surface, at the inventors who had been victimized by Meridian's systematic fraud, at the documentation that could potentially expose one of the largest intellectual property theft operations in recent history. Then she looked at Henry, seeing in his expression the same determination that had first attracted her to him in his cluttered garage. "Margaret," Isabella said quietly, "file an emergency motion with the court. I want Meridian's patents declared invalid based on fraudulent filings. I want a federal investigation into their business practices. And I want every inventor they've victimized to get their patents back." Patricia Vance stepped forward, her face flushed with frustration. "Isabella, this is madness. You're risking everything on evidence that might not hold up in court. The settlement offer rewards criminal behavior," Isabella interrupted, her voice carrying the authority that had built TechFlow into an industry leader. "We're not paying extortion money to corporate thieves." Dr. Hayes tried one more appeal to financial reason. "Isabella, even if you're right about Meridian's fraud, proving it could take years and cost more than the settlement. Isabella transferred from her wheelchair to a regular chair, positioning herself at eye level with her board members. 20 years ago, when I started this company, I made a promise that TechFlow would never compromise its principles for short-term profit. Today, I'm keeping that promise. She turned to look directly at Henry, her expression soft but determined. Henry, when you proposed developing affordable versions of your wheelchair alongside the premium models, you taught me something important about what this company should stand for. We're not just building technology, we're building a better world. As the board meeting concluded with a reluctant vote to continue fighting Meridian rather than accept their settlement offer, Henry felt a mixture of gratitude and terror. Isabella had risked her company's financial stability to support his principles, but the legal battle ahead would test both their relationship and their shared commitment to justice. The next morning would bring emergency court hearings, media attention, and the beginning of a legal fight that would determine not just the fate of Henry's wheelchair technology, but the future of individual innovation in an industry dominated by corporate giants. But tonight, as Henry and Isabella worked side by side preparing evidence and coordinating with whistleblowing inventors, he felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. The federal courthouse buzzed with unprecedented activity as news crews set up equipment outside the building, their satellite trucks lining the street like a technological army preparing for battle. The emergency hearing that Margaret Reeves had requested had evolved into something much larger, a landmark case that legal experts were calling a potential watershed moment for patent law and intellectual property rights. Henry stood at the window of their makeshift command center, a conference room the court had provided for case preparation, watching reporters interview patent attorneys and disability rights advocates who had gathered to witness what many hoped would be the exposure of the largest intellectual property fraud scheme in modern history. "Henry, we need you over here," Dr. Chen called from the main table, where she was coordinating with a team of technical experts who had volunteered their time to help expose Meridian's fraudulent practices. The past 72 hours had been a whirlwind of document analysis, expert consultations, and media interviews, as word of the case spread through the technology and disability communities. The breakthrough had come when Dr. Kim's testimony prompted 3 more inventors to come forward with evidence of Meridian's systematic targeting. Each had a similar story: innovative research conducted independently, followed by aggressive legal threats from Meridian, then forced settlements that stripped them of their intellectual property. But collectively, their documentation painted a picture of criminal conspiracy that even Meridian's expensive legal team would struggle to explain away. Isabella rolled into the conference room, having just completed a phone interview with TechCrunch about the broader implications of the case. Despite the enormous pressure and financial risk, she radiated the calm confidence of someone who had found her moral center and refused to be moved from it. "How are we looking?" she asked Margaret, who was reviewing the final arguments they would present to Judge Patricia Morrison in less than an hour. "Better than I dared hope," Margaret replied, though her expression remained cautiously optimistic. "Dr. Thornton's expert testimony for Meridian is looking increasingly problematic, now that we can prove the patents he was defending are based on stolen technology. His reputation is on the line too, if he knowingly provided false testimony." "He didn't know," Dr. Chen interrupted, looking up from her laptop. "I spoke with Dr. Thornton's research assistant this morning. Meridian provided him with carefully edited documentation that concealed the true origins of their patents. He's actually agreed to review our evidence and potentially revise his expert opinion." Henry felt his heart leap. Dr. Thornton's credibility had been one of their biggest obstacles. If the respected engineer was willing to reconsider his position based on new evidence, it could fundamentally shift the case dynamics. The hearing itself was standing room only, with disability advocates, technology journalists, and patent attorneys packing every available seat. Henry took his place at the plaintiff's table next to Isabella and Margaret, acutely aware that the next few hours would determine not just his personal future, but potentially the careers and livelihoods of dozens of inventors who had been victimized by Meridian's scheme. Judge Morrison called the court to order with the gravity of someone who understood the broader implications of the case before her. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to consider emergency motions regarding patent validity and allegations of systematic fraud in the intellectual property system. This court will examine evidence, evaluate testimony, and render decisions based solely on the facts presented." Margaret rose to present their case with the precision of a surgeon, methodically documenting how Meridian had identified promising inventors, used spurious legal threats to force settlements, then filed comprehensive patents based on the acquired technology. She presented dated research notes, prototype documentation, and witness testimony that established clear timelines showing Meridian's patents were based on prior work by independent inventors. "Your Honor," Margaret said, gesturing toward the gallery where Dr. Kim and the other inventors sat, "the defendants didn't just steal individual patents, they stole the dreams and life's work of innovators who were trying to solve problems that touched their hearts. They took technology designed to help people with disabilities and weaponized it for corporate profit." Meridian's lead attorney, Robert Ashford, attempted to dismiss the new evidence as a coordinated attack by disgruntled former business partners, but his arguments grew increasingly desperate as Margaret presented documentation showing the systematic nature of Meridian's targeting, including internal emails and financial records that had been obtained through emergency discovery motions. The turning point came when Dr. Thornton took the stand as a witness for the court rather than either party. His revision of his earlier expert testimony was devastating to Meridian's case. "Your Honor," Dr. Thornton said, his voice carrying the weight of professional integrity, "based on the new evidence presented, I must withdraw my earlier opinion regarding the originality of Meridian's patents. The technical specifications I was asked to evaluate were not original innovations but compilations of existing work by multiple inventors." He turned to look directly at Henry. "Mr. Gomez's technology is not derivative of Meridian's patents because Meridian's patents are derivative of earlier work by Dr. Kim, Dr. Torres, Dr. Chang, and others. Mr. Gomez appears to have independently developed solutions to mobility challenges that parallel the work of these other inventors, which strongly suggests that his innovations are genuine and original." The courtroom erupted in murmurs and whispered conversations as the implications of Dr. Thornton's testimony became clear. Meridian's legal team requested an immediate recess to consult with their clients, but Judge Morrison denied the request. "Mr. Ashford," the judge said sternly, "your clients have had ample opportunity to present their case. Based on the evidence presented today, this court finds compelling reasons to question the validity of Meridian's patent portfolio." What followed was a comprehensive ruling that exceeded even Margaret's most optimistic expectations. Judge Morrison declared 17 of Meridian's key patents invalid due to fraudulent filings, ordered an immediate cessation of all patent enforcement actions against TechFlow and Henry, and referred the case to federal prosecutors for criminal investigation. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, "This court orders Meridian Mobility Solutions to provide full disclosure of their patent acquisition practices to allow affected inventors to seek restitution for their stolen intellectual property." As the hearing concluded and spectators began filing out of the courtroom, Henry found himself surrounded by reporters, disability advocates, and fellow inventors who wanted to congratulate him on what many were calling a victory for individual innovation over corporate manipulation. But the person he most wanted to see was Isabella, who had waited patiently while he navigated the crowd of well-wishers. "We did it," Isabella said quietly as they finally found a moment alone in the courthouse corridor. "We actually did it." "You did it," Henry corrected. "You risked everything. Your company, your reputation, your financial security, to fight for something you believed in." "Isabella, I don't know how to thank you." Isabella reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers with the easy intimacy of partners who had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. "Henry, you don't need to thank me. You taught me what it means to fight for something bigger than profit margins and market share. You reminded me why I started TechFlow in the first place." The days that followed brought a whirlwind of media attention, business opportunities, and legal proceedings as federal prosecutors launched a comprehensive investigation into Meridian's fraudulent practices. Dr. Kim and the other victimized inventors began the process of reclaiming their stolen patents, while TechFlow's stock price soared as investors recognized the company's commitment to ethical innovation. But for Henry, the most meaningful moment came 3 weeks later when he visited his grandmother at the Sunset Gardens nursing home, bringing with him the first production prototype of his smart wheelchair system. Carmen Gomez had followed the news coverage with fierce pride, but nothing had prepared her for the experience of actually using the technology her grandson had created. "Me, Joe," she said as the wheelchair responded intuitively to her movements, automatically adjusting her position and providing gentle guidance toward her favorite spot by the garden window. "This doesn't feel like a machine." It feels like a friend. Henry watched his grandmother navigate the nursing home with unprecedented independence and dignity, understanding that this moment, not the courtroom victory or media attention, was what his invention was truly about. He had set out to help one person he loved, and in the process, had created something that could help millions of people worldwide. As he prepared to leave the nursing home that evening, Henry's phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. "Final wedding preparations tomorrow. Ready to make this official?" Henry smiled, typing back, "Ready to build a future together." The legal battle had tested their relationship in ways neither had anticipated, but it had also proven that their partnership could survive pressure, uncertainty, and the challenge of staying true to their principles when easier paths were available. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of their marriage, but Henry understood that their real commitment to each other had been forged in courtrooms and conference rooms, fighting side by side for justice and innovation. The wedding took place on a perfect Saturday morning in the TechFlow Innovation Center, surrounded by the prototypes and workbenches where Henry and Isabella had first discovered their shared vision for the future. They had chosen the location deliberately, wanting their marriage to reflect the partnership that had grown from professional collaboration into something deeper and more personal. The workspace had been transformed with white flowers and elegant lighting, but the essential character of the place remained, a celebration of innovation, creativity, and the belief that technology could make the world more accessible for everyone. Carmen Gomez sat in the front row in Henry's latest wheelchair prototype, the smart mobility system that had started their entire journey together. At 83, she had insisted on being Henry's best man, a role she claimed by right of having raised him and inspired his greatest invention. Her eyes sparkled with pride as she watched her grandson prepare to marry the remarkable woman who had believed in his dreams when no one else would. "Mijo," Carmen had told Henry the night before, "your grandfather always said that the best partnerships are built on three things: shared values, complementary strengths, and the courage to fight for each other when times get hard. You and Isabella have all three." Isabella wore a simple but elegant ivory dress that she could wear comfortably in her wheelchair, with a bouquet of white roses and baby's breath that complemented the flowers Dr. Chen and the engineering team had arranged throughout the space. Her auburn hair was styled in soft waves, and she wore the pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, a woman who had taught her that true strength came from lifting others up rather than climbing over them. The ceremony was officiated by Judge Patricia Morrison, who had agreed to perform the wedding after presiding over their legal victory against Meridian. Her presence symbolized the justice they had fought for together and the new beginning they were creating from the ashes of that battle. Marriage, Judge Morrison told the assembled guests, is often described as two people becoming one. But I've had the privilege of watching Henry and Isabella fight for their principles together, and I can tell you that their strength comes not from becoming identical, but from remaining individual while choosing to face the world as partners. The guest list reflected the unusual journey that had brought them together. Dr. Sarah Kim sat beside Dr. Torres and Dr. Chang, the inventors whose courage in exposing Meridian's fraud had helped secure justice for everyone. Margaret Reeves and the legal team occupied a full row, still celebrating what had become known in patent law circles as the, quote, Gomez decision. TechFlow employees mingled with Henry's neighborhood friends from Riverside Heights, creating conversations that bridged worlds and backgrounds that might never have intersected otherwise. Carlos from the neighboring garage sat next to Dr. Chen, debating the merits of different sensor technologies with the enthusiasm of people who understood that innovation could come from anywhere. Rosita had closed her bakery for the morning to attend, bringing enough pastries to feed everyone and declaring that Henry was like a son to her. Even Mrs. Valdez from the corner grocery store had come, wearing her finest dress, and a broad smile that suggested her earlier concerns about Isabella's intentions had been thoroughly dispelled. "Henry," Judge Morrison said, "please share your vows." Henry looked at Isabella, sitting beautiful and confident in her wheelchair, surrounded by the technology and the people who had become their extended family. "Isabella, 6 months ago I was a struggling mechanic who thought his biggest problem was paying rent. You showed me that my real problem was thinking too small, about my work, my dreams, and my capacity to love someone extraordinary." He paused, his voice growing stronger with emotion. "You didn't just believe in my technology, you believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You risked everything you had built to fight for what was right, even when everyone told you it was foolish." You taught me that true partnership means making each other braver, smarter, and more committed to changing the world. Isabella's eyes filled with tears as Henry continued. I promise to honor your independence while building our interdependence. I promise to challenge your ideas while supporting your dreams. And I promise that whether we're fighting patent trolls or figuring out whose turn it is to do dishes, we'll face everything together. When it was Isabella's turn, she reached for Henry's hands, noting the permanent grease stains that no amount of scrubbing could completely remove. Marks that had become symbols of his dedication to solving problems with his own hands. Henry, when I met you, I thought I was successful because I had built a profitable company and accumulated impressive credentials. You showed me that real success means creating something that matters to people who need it most. You reminded me that innovation without compassion is just clever engineering. Her voice carried across the transformed workspace to reach every guest. You built technology that doesn't just help people move through the world. It helps them move through the world with dignity. You saw your grandmother struggling, and you refused to accept that her limitations were permanent. That refusal to accept limitations, that determination to build something better, that's what I fell in love with. Isabella's smile was radiant as she made her promises. I vow to support your dreams while pursuing my own. I vow to remember that our greatest innovations will come from empathy, not algorithms. And I vow that whether we're in boardrooms or workshops, courtrooms or coffee shops, we'll always be partners in every sense of the word. The exchange of rings was simple but profound. Henry's band was crafted from recycled platinum, symbolizing his ability to create something beautiful from discarded materials. Isabella's ring incorporated a small diamond that had been her grandmother's, connecting their new beginning to the wisdom of previous generations. As Judge Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, the assembled guests erupted in applause that echoed through the Innovation Center. Henry and Isabella's kiss was gentle and full of promise, witnessed by the technology they had created together and the community they had built around their shared values. The reception that followed was a celebration of more than just their marriage. TechFlow had announced that morning the establishment of the Independent Inventors Defense Fund, a legal resource center designed to protect individual innovators from patent trolls and corporate fraud. The fund would be financed partly by licensing revenue from Henry's wheelchair technology and partly by donations from technology companies that recognized the importance of protecting grassroots innovation. Dr. Chen raised a toast to Henry and Isabella, who proved that the best partnerships multiply each other's strengths instead of trying to eliminate each other's differences. Carmen Gomez offered a blessing in Spanish that brought tears to many eyes, speaking of love that grows stronger through adversity and innovations that honor the people they're designed to serve. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Henry and Isabella found themselves alone in the workspace where their partnership had begun. The flowers and decorations would be removed tomorrow, returning the space to its function as a laboratory for accessibility innovations. But tonight, surrounded by the prototypes and possibilities that represented their shared future, they reflected on the journey that had brought them together. Any regrets? Isabella asked, echoing the question Henry had posed to her months earlier. Only that we wasted time worrying about what other people would think, Henry replied. Everything else, the legal battles, the media attention, the pressure from your board, it all led us here. Isabella nodded, understanding that their unconventional romance had been tested by forces that would have destroyed a less solid foundation. What's next for us? Henry gestured toward the workbench where his latest prototype sat, a mobility system designed for children with cerebral palsy, inspired by a letter from a 10-year-old girl who had seen news coverage of his wheelchair technology. More innovations, more fights worth having, more chances to prove that technology should serve people, not profit margins. As they prepared to leave for their honeymoon, a road trip across the country to visit disabled veterans and independent inventors who had reached out after hearing their story, Henry reflected on the transformation his life had undergone. He had started as a struggling mechanic trying to help his grandmother, and he had become part of a movement to democratize innovation and protect the rights of individual inventors. But more than professional success or legal victories, he had found something he hadn't known he was looking for. A partner who shared his values, challenged his assumptions, and made him believe that two people committed to justice could actually change the world. The smart wheelchair that had started everything sat quietly in the corner, its sensors dark, but its potential unlimited. Tomorrow, production would begin on the affordable version that would be covered by Medicare and distributed through nonprofit organizations. The premium model would continue generating revenue to fund research and legal defense for other inventors. And Henry would continue refining the technology, guided by letters from users and visits to communities where mobility challenges intersected with economic hardship. As Henry and Isabella drove away from TechFlow headquarters toward their new life together, neither could have imagined the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple desire to help someone cross a street in the rain. They had found love, fought for justice, and created innovations that would improve countless lives. Most importantly, they had proven that the best partnerships, in business, in advocacy, and in marriage, are built on the foundation of shared values and the courage to fight for what matters most. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.